Welcome to SportsLit. I am Nate Sager.
And I'm Neil Acharya.
Thank you, Neil. Today we are joined by someone who reported on hockey with a lot of jam. Al Strachan spent close to 4 decades covering the sport as an irascible insider who cultivated a contacts list longer than the NHL guide and record book. After starting out at the Windsor Star in the early 70s, he became a hockey writer at the Montreal Gazette, and then the Globe and Mail, and the Toronto Sun when it had a sports section that could have been a standalone daily. In 1993, Al won the Hockey Hall of Fame's Elmer Ferguson Award, which is given each year to one scribe whose words have brought honor to journalism and hockey. Now today, who is first on a breaking NHL story can come down to a matter of seconds on social media, but Strack was sometimes weeks ahead of the pack. His new book is Hockey's Hot Stove, The Untold Stories of the Original Insiders, which is forthcoming from Simon & Schuster Canada. It's a chronicle of his years on the CBC's Hockey Night in Canada. Al was part of the satellite Hot Stove show within the show that aired in the second intermission of national Saturday night telecasts. If Strack ever straddled the fence on an issue, well, I never saw it. I must have been not watching that week. The Insiders balanced packing indispensable information for serious hockey fans into 8.5 minutes, but did it without taking themselves too seriously. Now, of course, even before COVID, we're used to seeing it screen with like 4 different faces on it, but it was novel at the time. The panelists would often be, double, triple, or quadruple box because they were recording from different cities with a dependence on the oft-dodgy 1990s tech. But Strachan and the other panelists, such as John Davidson or Jim Houston, they always came across as just 4 knowledgeable fans talking hockey in a rec room as they looped fans in on league storylines. And they had a lot to talk about in the 90s and early aughts when the NHL was going through some growing pains with Gary Bettman's Southern strategy. Satellite Hot Stove, it was good TV, Neil, and it probably built a template for intermission panels we see on all telecasts today, not just in hockey. Al had a vital role in that, Neil.
Yes, the race to break news, to be first out with a trade, signing, hiring, firing, or to verify the fanned flames of speculation is the role of the insider. These days, hockey fans find out most of their current info from Bob McKenzie, Darren Dreger, Elliot Friedman, and Chris Johnson, and others, by refreshing their Twitter feed. But prior to social media, the insiders reigned supreme on the printed page and then TV. In terms of TV, as you said, one of the best places to find out what was happening and what was about to happen was the satellite Hot Stove on Hockey Night in Canada. The intermission segment, which brought together a panel of insiders to share opinions and argue about the latest happenings in the league, was part of the triumvirate that completed the Hockey Night in Canada package in the 1990s. That went along with Coach's Corner and, of course, the game itself. The brainchild of executive producer John Shannon, and Satellite Hot Stove was born during the NHL lockout in 1994. Now, it's the main subject of the book you mentioned by Al Strachan, Hockey's Hot Stove, the untold stories of the original insiders. This explains the origins of the program and Al's fulfilling experiences working with fellow writers, broadcast colleagues, and producers. Al is what you call a full contact journalist. Like the multitude of players he covered over the years, he's not afraid to antagonize and call things as he sees them. And so in this book, he also addresses his departure from the program both times, the last which occurred in October 2010, I believe. One may wonder why people care so much about a segment and why an entire book can be devoted to it. So I'll bring you back to Season 2, Episode 5 of SportsLit, where we spoke to Dave Shoalts about Hockey Fight in Canada, the book which covered the battle for the rights for the program, for Hockey Night in Canada. He told us his Globe and Mail columns about why Hockey Night in Canada, or what Hockey Night in Canada was doing, and any news about that program. He said it always moved the dial. Without question, the program was and still is a cultural institution. Al was there while the cameras were rolling, and more importantly for the case of this book, when they weren't. So, like the game he covered, he was in good position to weave this story together. Today we welcome Al Strachan from his home, or one of his homes, in Florida.
All right.
All right, we're back on SportsLit with Hall of Fame hockey journalist Al Strachan. And Al, we talked about the satellite hot stove extensively in the intro. So for those that don't know about the satellite hot stove, what was the format and how did the cast of characters make it click?
We sort of bounced off each other a lot, and we were all good friends. The format was that we would get together just before the show, usually because we had other jobs. We were mostly journalists, or in the case of John Davidson, he was the broadcaster for the Rangers, and Jim Houston was off in different time zones. So we'd get together and very briefly talk about what we had to do. This was in the initial format. Later on, when it became much more formal and we got away from the screens quite as much and we got away from being in all the different cities, then we had a bit more time to do it, and it was much more formal and structured. But in the original format, this was it. So we didn't have a lot of time, and we often didn't really know what we were going to talk about, and certainly not in the format. And as John pointed out, John Shannon being the guy who put it all together, as John pointed out, we were never told what to say, and nobody ever knew how we were going to say it, and usually that included ourselves. So as a result, there was a lot of interaction going on. There were interruptions occasionally between the people and people speaking over each other, but John thought that was fine because he said the whole concept should be an interaction between the people on TV and the people watching it on TV, and it was just as if you were sitting in a bar, which you and I have done on occasion, Neil, and people are talking and somebody speaks over someone else, and that's the way it happens, and then you go on and the person who either shouts the loudest or persists gets to make his case, and that was the informality of the whole show, and I think that had a lot to do with making it successful because the people sitting there watching it, we hoped, almost felt that they were a part of it.
And what was it about the NHL in that era, I guess, between the first two lockouts, 94 to 2005, that kept you and the insiders so busy? And, and how does that maybe compare to how league business has been conducted in more recent times?
It changed a lot after that because what happened was that the first major lockout, the one that shut down the league for a year, resulted in the NHL seizing pretty much all the power. The NHL Players Association continued to exist, but it had been a very powerful entity before that. And after that, it no longer was. So the league was able to control what the players were saying and access to those players from the media. Before that, we had pretty well unfettered access. We could go in before the games even, and although we rarely bothered because there wasn't a lot they would say before the games that was going to impact what you were going to write half an hour later or an hour later or 2 hours later, whatever it may be, and especially because the morning skates were all open, so if you really wanted anything, you'd have got it in the morning, and that would have been taken care of. But after the game, you went in and you talked to all the players who were sitting around and in various states of undress, and they would answer your questions, and you could usually get one alone in most cities, not always. Toronto was always a zoo, but in other places you can get a player, or if you knew him, which was often the case, you could call him aside and find things, and you could often arrange to go out with them afterward, go for a beer or two. They would often suggest it, and often I would suggest it, but it wasn't uncommon. In fact, it was quite common to go out for a beer or two with players after the game. Well, all that changed when Gary took over, partly because they were on such a tight schedule in many cases, and instead of hanging around in a city and going out for a beer, the players were on the plane, and they had 45 minutes to get out of the building, they were told. So that didn't leave them a lot of time to talk to us. That was one of the things, but areas of the dressing room were closed off, and the only part that was available often on a limited basis. And so in the major cities, when a player would come out, there'd be a rush of people like lemmings towards these players, and you couldn't really get anything personal. And then the other factor, of course, was the development of cell phones and podcasts. Not that yours is any problem, but there were people who just took upon themselves to say that they had a podcast and they needed access, and these people really were rarely heard of. They were just fans who got a chance to get into a dressing room. So the league responded by bringing out one player at a time instead of having the whole team sitting around, and then they would all give the same answers, basically. We had to cut down their time and space, and yes, I was happy about scoring 5 goals tonight and that sort of thing. And then off you go. So the whole thing changed, and it was partly the National Hockey League, I think, doing it. It was partly the advent of technology, and it was partly the breaking of the NHL Players Association. And if you want to go into that, that's a whole separate topic, but I'm willing to discuss it if you're interested in it, but it really didn't have a lot to do with hot stove.
Sure. I mean, feel free. Yeah, go ahead. I mean, we can set you up on it, but go ahead if you're ready right now.
Yeah, take us back to like 0405.
It's a thing that hasn't been discussed an awful lot, and it's something that I think probably would make a rewarding book for the writer and a rewarding book for the people who are interested in such things, namely the agents and the NHL officials and maybe a few players, but I don't think it would really be a bestseller because people, I don't think, really care an awful lot about it this many years after the fact, because it's about 15 now roughly. But what happened prior to that lockout was that Bob Goodnow went to every team in the league and had a meeting with every single one of them. In many cases, they weren't allowed to meet in the building. That was the nature of the animosity in those days. And most, I'd say probably half, I guess, of the general managers said, yeah, okay, you could meet them after the morning skate. Some of them, however, said, you work out some other time. The morning skate is our time, and we need to talk to our players afterwards. Some of them said, you're not going to do it in our building. You better go and find a nearby restaurant or your hotel or something. But whatever the problems may have been, Bob Goodnow went around with a couple of his assistants in order to answer questions and spoke to every team in the league. And he gave them all the same speech. He said, look, here's what's going to happen. We are going to be locked out if you want to go after what you want. And what you want and what you really, really need is a new contract without any form of salary cap. Because if you get a salary cap, that means that every year thereafter, players will take less money. They'll take a smaller share of the money because every year the league will say, well, we need, this plus 1%, this plus 2%, this plus 3%, whatever it is. But whatever it may be, it's going to mean that they're going to take more money in every negotiation and you're going to get less. And you can't have that. You can't let them structure your salaries. So it's going to cost you, though, because the first year is going to be a problem. We are going to have to be out for the whole year. They won't respond until we've missed a year and we're missing the next training camp. That should be clear, and everybody should understand that. And after about maybe a month or so, the first time they've blocked us out, your wives are going to say, my credit card, they're saying that, I'm getting near the limit, and, and I don't really want to spend. What do you think? Maybe you should go back? And you're going to have to say, no, I'm not going back. And then by Christmas, you're going to want to meet with your family, and your dad's going to get you in the kitchen over a beer, and he's going to say, son, you make more in a year than I made in my whole life pretty well. Don't you think you should really go back? And your mom and I think you should go back, and don't forget, that it's going to cause you a lot of problems, and people aren't going to like it. And Bob said, and that's another pressure. So that's the second time you're going to have to say, no, we're not going back. We're going to have to be out the entire year. And then he said to the players, now, we need total support for this. And you have to understand this. And if you don't understand this, and if you're not ready to go out for a full year, then don't. Let's get this thing settled now and make a deal. But you say you are. And so they had to vote, and it was about 98.5% or something of the people, the players said, yeah, we'll do this. We've got the resolve. We'll stick up. Well, the problem was that by January, a lot of the agents were getting upset because they're not getting any money, and they've got offices to run, and they've got staff there, and they're getting nothing because the players are getting nothing. So they start agitating with their players to say, look, Bob's leading you astray here. And then some of them, I think some of those names have been in the paper, but some of them then went to New York and spoke to Gary and said, what can we do about this? And the response was, well, you have to get a Goodenough. So they stabbed Goodenough in the back. They got rid of him around the February. They told him his services would no longer be wanted. And ever since then, the NHL's Player Association has not been powerful. During the time that Bob Goodenough was there, the salary went from $190,000 a year average to $1.9 million. 10 times in the years that he was there. And since then, it hasn't really gone up much. It's just pretty much the same. And the players have less authority, and they take a smaller cut every year, and there's all this escrow, and they have to do what they're told by the league. They can't go and chat with the media anymore, among other things. But that's what happened. And the Players Association today is just a shell. It's really a shambles. And there's, I've given you the basic story there. There are more specifics to go with it, but that's essentially what happened. And so when all that happened, then the treatment of the players towards the media all changed, because a lot of the media, it must be said, were on the side of the ownership. In fact, the majority of them were on the side of the ownership during that lockout. I mean, I'll go back, you greedy buggers, and so on and so forth. And so a lot of animosity was developed between the media and the players, and it's not easy to get rid of it. So there you go.
And in your opinion, in the 15 years since then, what's having a salary cap done to enjoyment of the game? I'm thinking of a couple of friends of mine who say it punishes the teams that draft and develop well, because then, they have to sign their best players at, the market rate, and then they kind of get beat up on the back end, like the Chicago Blackhawks popped to mind there.
Yeah, you get punished for being a good team, and the Blackhawks were one of the more obvious examples. But it happens to all of them. You can't keep your players around, and you can't necessarily make players happy. And you get all of these players now. Whenever it's salary time for the bigger names, the first thing that is suggested is you give the hometown break if you want to stay with this team. Well, why should you give them a hometown break? Why should they come out of your pocket? If you're a $8 million player, why should you sign for $6 million just because your team is up against the wall on the salary cap? And from a fan's point of view, why should you risk losing that player? You've supported him. You've supported the team. He wants to be there, but he's not going to be there because of Gary's salary cap, because they can't afford to keep the good players. And the argument of the people who are in favor of it is that, well, if it weren't for the salary cap, the small teams wouldn't survive. Well, the small teams did pretty well before the salary cap. Edmonton, it seems to me, won 5 Stanley Cups in 7 years. And if you looked at the last 3 years before the shutdown, the year that shut down, the final 4 in those 3 years, there were 12 different teams. So everybody was taking their turn. You still could be a good team. You had to rely on your own ability to sign people, to scout them, and all that sort of thing. And now you have to hire a capologist to do all these things. You can't really encourage people with bonuses that much, because a bonus counts as part of the salary towards the salary cap figures. So you can't say, well, here you go, we'll give you $2 million and a $6 million bonus. Well, none of that. And so you get all these strange things that have to be done where they front end some of these things. I think they've cut back on this little trick where you're going to give a guy, say, $30 million over 3 years. So you give him 9, 9, and 9, and then you put him on $1 million for the next 15 years when he's retired and all that sort of thing, just so you balance out the average for the salary cap. What do you think is Austin Matthews' salary at the moment?
Oh. No idea.
It's about $700,000. I'm not sorry, not Austin Matthews, John Tavares rather. Right. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of $700,000 a year. The rest of it is in various bonuses and other things, all these things, structural things they have to do, and to find a way to get him $11 million. It's become an accountant's game rather than the fans' game. So.
Right, and I think I've seen you, and I think we brought this up in a previous podcast quote of yours, which is the league has turned hockey fans into accountants. And also, I mean, in terms of, I was going to segue into this next question, but I will ask you just because it's topical. How do you think that changed reporting? Just with all these numbers and cap figures. I mean, writers generally weren't known as math wizards. I think that's a lot of the reasons why we ended up
known
getting
as wizards in any area.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, do you think it changed the way reporting worked, and did you have to have a new crop of journalists with different skill sets coming in that kind of knew this stuff?
I think it changed the approach, not necessarily that you needed a different skill set. I think one of the strange things about the job always was that people thought that you had to be a great sports fan and know all the statistics going back 20 years and everything. Well, no, you didn't really, because the statistics were always there for you. What you had to do, you had to be a bit of a doctor to know the difference between an ACL and an MCL. You had to be a bit of a travel agent to get yourself from one city to the next, and you had to be a bit of a psychologist, and you had to all these other things that you had to do, and a fairly decent writer, obviously, and do it fairly quickly, and that sort of thing. But you didn't really have to know an awful lot about sports. You could find that out from the people who were in it, I always used to do that, and if I were watching an NHL final, especially the finals, but earlier some of the other ones, and a team would be doing something, and I'd call a friend of mine, the coach or a general manager or somebody that wasn't involved, and I'll say, what are they doing? How are they doing this? And I'd get all this, and then I would write it, and people say, well, you must really know the game. I don't know the game. I just know the people who do know the game, and you pass that along. So, but then now, especially, I think probably the best city to look at as an example of this is Edmonton. For some reason, the Edmonton writers are unable to evaluate anyone without looking at money. And these stories will say, well, he's earning $400,000 per 10 assists or something like that. Everything is all worked out for money. And the point is, you're not paying any of it.
Right.
So don't worry about how much he's earning. But it does affect the fans, as you were saying, in the sense that if you want to evaluate a trade, you don't look at the players anymore. You don't trade a winger for a goalie or anything like that. You trade a cap for a cap, a contract for a contract, and that's what you have to do. And so when a player becomes available, a fan might look at it and say, boy, he would look good on my team. And now a fan looks at it and says, oh, well, we can't fit his salary into our salary cap because we're near the limit, and we would have to move somebody else at his salary to get this salary, and so on. And why should you have to do that? It's taken away from the evaluation part of the game and turned people into accountants, as we said.
In terms of this book, I've read and heard different things about what constitutes an insider and where the term originated in regard to hockey media. So was that part of the reason the subheading includes original? The untold stories of the original
maybe,
insiders?
I don't know. The thing, what people don't realize is that the writer doesn't have anything to do with the title
or
of
the picture,
book.
or the picture.
I got so much trouble for Why the Leafs Suck. I had nothing to do with calling it Why the Leafs Suck.
Right.
But I think it is, because the original I mentioned in the book, as far as I know, and I would be corrected if anybody knew more about this, but as far as I know, the insider term was first applied to a series of columns that were on the back page of the Globe and Mail sports section in the 80s. And the back page would be divided into usually 3 blocks, maybe 4, and the specialists from the sports would write about their sports, and it'd be a little notes column, and it was labeled the Insiders. And I think that's the first time I ever heard of it, and there was often lots of good little bits in there. And the Globe and Mail in those days, when I started at the Globe and Mail in 1980, there were 44 people on staff. I think there are 3 today. And so they had 4 racing writers, horse racing.
Right.
And they also had a lot of people who sat around doing nothing. What they say in business, that 20% of the people do 80% of the work. Well, that was certainly the case at the Globe.
Yeah.
But it was a good time, and it was a very good product, a very, very good product in those days. And that's, as far as I know, that's where the insiders came from. And then John Shannon saw this going on, especially in the hockey area, obviously, and then thought, why am I having to read this on Saturday morning, and it's not on our show on Saturday night, and there's all this stuff, and then read, he also liked Kevin Dupont, the Boston Globe, so I read his on Sunday morning, and there's more stuff we didn't have last night. So why is it that we've got a hockey show, but none of this stuff is in it, and it's all the stuff that people are interested in? And so that's how that came about.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting part in the book. In a TSN article titled 5 Minutes with Bob McKenzie, he is quoted as saying, "I always thought of myself as a hockey writer. I always thought of myself as having reporter sensibilities." And I bring that up because as media has morphed into one umbrella under digital, do you view yourself in that light as a writer? Because you spent a long time, decades in front of the camera, with the Score and obviously with the Hot Stove. So a lot of people may know you as the TV person, but do you go back to, like Bob, viewing yourself as the writer first?
It's interesting that he would say that. He's a good friend, Bob McKenzie. We, at one time, we had a little complex of 4 desks there in the Globe and Mail, and he had one of them. And then the Globe and Mail, first time they actually started to cut back a little bit, and Bob got cut back. And he was out of work, and he was about 2 weeks away from joining the Toronto Police Force when he got an offer to work for the Hockey News. I don't know if I should be telling you all this, but anyway,
we'll take it, Al.
There's no reason why it shouldn't. And
No, I said we'll take it, Al. Please share.
No, I don't think there's any problem with it,
Right.
And so then when he got to the Hockey News, then he, as part of his job, was an editor type, didn't do much writing. But he had to talk to people in all the cities. So every week, Bob would talk to people in all the NHL cities who were writing the articles for the Hockey News. And so Bob became one of the most conversant people in the known world with all this hockey knowledge, and he then morphed into becoming a writer. But I don't think he necessarily saw himself as a hockey writer when he was at the Globe, but maybe he did. I mean, if he says that, I guess he did. He'd come down from, what was he, in the Sioux, I think, before that? Somewhere up there.
Yeah, the Sioux Star.
And I think he covered the juniors up there, but he wasn't covering much hockey at the Globe because he was just a junior, and they only had about 8 hockey writers ahead of him because, as I said, they had 44 people. But it's whatever you evaluate yourself as. I guess I evaluate myself as a writer more than a TV person, but really I just evaluate myself in those days, not anymore, as being a part of the hockey community. I always felt at home there, and in one of the books I did, I made the analogy of the NHL to being like a village of maybe a couple of thousand people, and everybody knows everybody if you're really in that village. And if you're one of the main hockey writers working for a larger paper, and you do the travel so that these guys see you home and away, because just seeing them in their own city doesn't mean that much, but you see them in your city as well, and you get calls from them on occasion, and you have the ability to read what they write, and you sort of accept it as being useful and authentic, then you become a part of that community, and everybody gets to know you just like they would in any small village. And the people who don't travel, the sports writers, would be more like maybe a repairman coming in from a nearby village to come and fix your fridge or something. He's useful to have around, but he's not really part of your community. And I always thought I was part of the hockey community because I could talk to presidents or general managers or coaches or assistant coaches or players or trainers, and I knew the names of trainers in the city and say hello to them, and they knew me and they said hello to me and that sort of stuff. And I would occasionally, especially when the Hot Stove got rolling a bit, I'd go into a room and I'd have players say hello to me, and I didn't know who they were. And usually it's the other way around for the media. They go and talk to players. The players don't know who they are. But
And
it gets to be different, and you get to be. I just felt I was really a part of the whole community, and rather than identifying myself as either written or visual media.
And that Hockey Village pub was the best around, too.
Well, there were a lot of pubs in that village. And they all stayed open late.
Yeah. And in writing about that era and being in that community, what was more fun to write about when you were formatting this book? The behind-the-scenes stuff with Satellite Hot Stove, or some of those, sports writer travel stories that anyone who's traveled to cover sports inevitably has?
There was a whole range of them, really. I mean, the thing I miss the most is the camaraderie with the other media guys, and some of it with the players. But we would go out for dinners, especially on the night before a game and the bigger events, and we all had a lot of good food, spent a lot of time there. We'd talk about a 2-hour dinner or whatever. And then the Canadian guys would all go out to the pub afterwards and have more beers. And I always thought that everybody did it until one point. We were somewhere, I think it was Los Angeles or something, and there were a couple of Americans, and we're all in the parking lot there. And I said, "You guys going to go to this place?" No. They said, "We're not." So why not? So, well, have you ever noticed it's only the Canadians that do that? And I hadn't noticed that, but I guess it was. But that's what we used to do, and I've close friends all over the hockey community, but especially the ones in Canada, because we spent so much time together. So those are the kind of memories, and as for any one given story, I don't know that there is one, but we used to tell stories, and it was mostly what had happened lately, or your involvement with a player or a general manager or something like that, and the reactions. And we did exchange a lot of stories that were gossip, I guess, that we all understood would not see the light of day in a newspaper, because they were the kind of things that you just didn't put out there, but we all knew them.
Al, earlier on, I had asked you to read a passage. I was wondering if you had that nearby.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead and read it, and then after I will follow up. And feel free to insert anything into that passage that may need clarity.
Yeah. Well, I'll just mention that this was a time I've mentioned in the book, and mentioned to anybody who knows, that one of the drawbacks of that lifestyle is that it's hard to maintain a marriage, because you travel so much, and when you're away, the wife has to take care of everything, and then when you come back and you start trying to take care of things, and she's, wait a minute, do I really need this? And so my wife and I split up amicably in 1996, and we're still good friends, and she edits everything that I do. She worked for the Montreal Gazette as an editor, and so she's a very capable copy editor, and she's ideal to have as a copy editor, because you write something and you send it off to somebody that you don't know, and they say, "Oh yeah, it's good, and it may not be, but when it's your wife and you write it off and you send it, that's absolute drivel. What are you writing that for? You can do better than that. And why would you say this when really, And so she keeps me on my toes, and I really appreciate that. And she, well, we were talking yesterday, I think, or the day before. But we're still very good friends, and she lives in England, and we have our 2 sons that we communicate with, one of whom's in London, one's in Boston, and but we just sort of drifted apart, because it had been about 25 years, and when you think about it, over 25 years, do you still like the same kind of food? Do you still like the same kind of music? Do you still watch the same kind of TV shows and so on? You change, and your life changes, and we changed, and we just went in different directions. She had been a great hockey fan at one point, and then she got away from it, I think perhaps because of a bit of resentment as to what it was doing to me, and that it was taking over my life. And people call all the time when you're doing that, and I can't control what time people call, and
Right.
some of them call at strange hours, and some general manager calls, and, he's in a bar somewhere in a different time zone. What are you going to do? Say, oh, no, give me a call tomorrow. And you talk to him. You might have been in the middle of dinner or something. And so there were problems. But anyway, as I say, we're still very good friends. But at the time that this happened, we were going to look for a house for her in Kingston. She eventually decided she'd rather live in England than in Kingston, Ontario. But this is the time frame. This is set. Following the afternoon taping of Hot Stove and the Gretzky discussion, we drove to the Kingston area where some of her relatives lived, planning to look at some houses the next day. It was about midnight, and we were asleep when the phone rang in our motel room. "It's done," the voice said. I called the son and dictated a story. Although the deal had yet to be filed with the league, the negotiations appeared to be complete. Gretzky would go to St. Louis. In exchange, Patrice Tardif, Roman Vopak, Craig Johnson, and a 1997 first-round draft pick would go to the Los Angeles Kings. On Sunday, we looked at houses near Kingston and even put in an offer on one. In a free moment, I called Gretzky. "Go to Winnipeg," he said. "We're playing there tomorrow night. There are still some parts to be arranged." Off to Winnipeg I went, and when I met him in the dressing room after the game, Whedon did something he had never done before. He told the rest of the media, "I'll be back," then said to me, "Let's go outside." We left the dressing room and went to the players' bench. The arena was virtually empty by then, so he walked down to the far end and signaled to those who followed that they should not come into the bench area. He filled me in on a few of the aspects of the negotiations, then said, "I am not going on with the Kings to Tampa. I'm going home. You should go to Vancouver. Are you going to stay at the Bayshore as usual?" I assured him that I would. That was where I always stayed in Vancouver, and that was the site of the Blues' next game. "I'll call you there in the afternoon," he said. The next day, the deal was officially announced by the two teams. By that time, a fifth-round draft pick had been added. Sam McMaster, the Kings' general manager, having read the details of the trade in the Sunday Sun, didn't like the fact that the article was totally accurate. So he demanded that a fourth-round draft pick be incorporated just to make the Sun story wrong. Mike Keenan, general manager of the Blues, refused to go higher than a fifth-rounder, and McMaster begrudgingly conceded. So when you read the details of the trade now, you'll see that it involves two draft picks rather than one, which was the original deal. Sure enough, while I was in Vancouver, Wayne called and filled in all the details. His unhappiness with the Kings had been focused on the team's refusal to add some quality players, and in the process, increase the payroll. He had been promised in August that the team would follow that pattern, but when they hadn't done it by January, he started agitating for a trade. He felt that he had done his bit to help the Kings' financial situation by deferring part of his salary, but the team hadn't lived up to its obligations. "I deferred close to 70% of my salary," he told me. "Here's a guy, Kings owner Philip Anschutz, who just got a check for $1 billion in a Los Angeles land deal, who paid $115 million for the franchise, and who's talking about a new stadium for $250 million, and he asked me to defer my money." I said, "No problem," and I did it. And for people to say that the trade was just over money, it was ridiculous. That part hurt me the most. Next afternoon, he called again. "You want to go for a sandwich?" he asked. As my waistline testifies, I rarely turn down food. I think there's an obligation of that nature written somewhere in the sports writer's official code of conduct. This was just a social association, not work. So we chatted about a number of NHL developments, exchanged family news, and passed along some bits of gossip. So that's the end of that section there. I might add, though, that in my usual sailing, I didn't have a sandwich. Well, I did have a sandwich. Then I also had some apple pie afterwards, which is probably not a good idea when you're between lunch and dinner, you know?
Yeah, no. Go ahead.
Why do hockey writers get fat? Yeah.
Well, I have to say, I thought that was an interesting passage for a number of reasons, and obviously the tightness and the closeness with players, and especially, I mean, in your case, with the greatest player of all time. And I mean, I could go different directions with this. Initially, what I wanted to know was, given your closeness to the Great One, how did things change from 1988 when the first blockbuster trade happened to 1996 in relation to how reporting was done? Because you had the TV gig by then, and in '88 you were strictly a print guy, I believe, right?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to say. The years all rolled together. I don't think they were doing the hot stove then, were they? No. So I would do occasional TV hits. You always do. But yeah, you're right. For the most part, yeah, you're right. Yeah. As to how it changed, his relationship with me didn't change because he was an avid hockey fan and an avid hockey reader, and he would find out everything that was going on everywhere. And of course, his dad, with whom he communicated on a daily basis, would always tell him what I had written in Toronto if he hadn't actually seen the Globe somewhere. So we always got along very well there, and then we were very close friends for a long, long time. And now we're friends, but we can't be the same. You can't be the same as you were with a guy who was single and you were acting like you were single. As a guy with 5 kids and retired and everything else. So, we stayed friends after he went to Los Angeles. We stayed friends throughout his career. And he just helped me out with something a little while ago. And he actually offered to write a foreword for this book. And I didn't pursue it just because I don't like to put too many obligations on him. And people would call me during those times from radio stations or whatever, or some of the things, say, well, you're really close to Gretzky. Do you think you could ask him to do this? And I said, no, because one of the reasons I'm close to Wayne is that I don't ask him to do things like that. We're just friends, and you're going to have to go through and do it yourself if you want him. I'm not going to impose these kind of things on him. And but anyway, we are still friends, as it were, and he still helped me out, and I just didn't want to ask him again to do the foreword, because I originally did call when we started doing the book, and I said, I don't know, I'm just thinking now, how did I get in touch with him? I mean, I did call him, but he answered the phone. This was the astonishing thing. That was what I'm just thinking. That's what stopped me there in my tracks for a sec, because usually you do text, and usually if you phone his phone, he doesn't answer it,
Right.
And the message thing is full. Anyway, on this case, I called, and he answered. I think he was about ready to tee off. And I said, hey, I'm doing a new book. You want to do a foreword for it? He said, absolutely, 100%. Just give me a call when it's ready. And I said, okay. And I just assumed that because he had answered the phone, he was, expecting somebody else's call, because he just doesn't usually answer it. And so that was the end of it. And that when we talked about, but that was always his approach. But then, months later, when the book was actually written, I just didn't. I didn't call him back.
So, speaking of Wayne Gretzky, when I look back at the hot stove and my experience watching it, the first I had ever heard about the fact that he was going to retire was on Hot Stove, and I remember JD mentioning it right at the tail end of that 99 season. My guess is it was about maybe 4 or 5 games remaining in the season. And I wanted to know how that whole situation was handled by the panel, given the fact that you were close to the Great One, JD was in New York and close to the Great One, and John Shannon was tight with the Great One. So, was it a matter of someone got to say it, but you all knew, and JD got that, that? Okay.
Yeah, I was keeping quiet, and I was surprised that JD said anything, if I remember rightly, because, we sort of knew it was coming, and we were just, he'd been thinking about it, and he had a really bad back injury, if you remember. Mm-hmm. And the C6 vertebrae, for those who want to be technical. But he was out for, 4 months or something? He was out for a long, long time.
Yeah, he only played 49 games.
He was getting banged around, and then Gary Suter slammed him into the boards, remember? Because that was during one of the international games, and Suter knew he could get away with it, because if it were against the Kings or something, Marty McSorley would have beaten him to a pulp. But it was an international game, so he got away with it. And he was just, wearing down. And then later on, I'm trying to think how much later on it was. So Scott Morrison did a book. By that time, Scott Morrison was working for CBC, and they were assigning books to him, and he was going around. He had to go to a whole bunch of hockey players and ask them for their greatest moment in hockey. And so he and I, Gretz was, he had to open some golf course or something somewhere outside of Toronto. So Scott and I drove down there and had lunch with him. And Scott asked him that question, said, what was your greatest moment? And he said, the day I retired. And I was shocked. I really was. I would have thought, all the things that he did, all the cups that he won, all the trophies, and that it would have been something like that. And no, it was the day he retired. And so I was, yes, I knew that he was thinking of it, but I also still had in my mind that he probably wouldn't go through with it. So I never said anything, and then JD did, but that wasn't uncommon for JD to say things that I didn't expect.
Go ahead, Nate.
Now, two producers that you hold in high esteem, well, two among the producers you hold in high esteem, John Shannon and Shirley Najik, how did each of them get the best out of the people that were facing the camera?
John Shannon was very demanding, and but he was very fair. The military axiom for officers is to be fair, firm, and friendly, and that's what John was. And you just had such tremendous admiration for John because he was so knowledgeable and he was so highly regarded, not just in Canada, but throughout the world, the TV world. He was the one that the Olympic people called every year to put together, or not every year, every 4 years rather, to put together their telecast, to put the world feed for hockey out there. And he worked hard at it. He was proud of it, and he knew the people, as you say, but he was very rigid in the sense that it was going to be done John's way, and that was that. And that's why John got fired twice in Minnesota and in Calgary when he was working for Hockey Night the first time. And but in both cases, John was right. I mean, it's just that other people weren't as good as John and couldn't quite see that, couldn't quite accept it, but John wouldn't bend. And he was the same way with the people on the show. You had to do what John wanted, but not in the sense of, here, go and say this, but just in the sense of, in my case, I was supposed to smile. I was supposed to stir things up a little bit. I was supposed to be flip, supposed to roll my eyes and all these sort of things. Not that he ever said this, but when I started, if I'd done something like this, he would say, that's good, keep doing that sort of thing, and if there's something he didn't like, he'd say, don't do that again. And that would be that. And so you had to do it John's way, but really it was your way. It was just that the parts of it that John approved of and everything. Well, Shirley is much more of a comedian. Like, he has a type of personality that's hard to describe. He can be very funny. He's funny most of the time. And we had the kind of relationship that was just insults back and forth, basically. And he'd just come at you, and you'd go back at him, and nobody would get mad. He'd say all kinds of things that probably get you put in jail these days if anybody were recording them. And but when he wanted something, he would tell you. He would take you aside and say, look, they got to do this. You guys have got to do this, and I'm getting some heat and everything, and here's the way we've got to approach this, and no screwing around, all right? So say, okay. Yeah, and that was that. So it was a different approach. I mean, they both really wanted this, the kind of show that they wanted, and they were both determined to get the kind of show that they wanted, but they really had a completely different way of getting it. It was more, in Shirley's case, it was more likely to come along and say, how can you be so stupid? I mean, when you said that, do you realize how dumb you looked? You think maybe it would be a good idea not to do that again? Something like that. Whereas Shannon would say, that was wrong, don't do that again. You know, so there's that difference, but I really appreciated both of them, and they were both a big help to me.
Yeah, and I'll always appreciate John Shannon for once complimenting my Minnesota North Stars hat in an elevator, because I was just like starstruck when he was there, and he's just like,
Did you see the Minnesota North Stars?
Yes,
No, the Minnesota
reverse
Wild,
retro?
I guess. Retro jersey
yes.
that they came out with?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I think the Avalanche is the best by far, but Minnesota is a definite runaway second. That's a really sharp footer.
For sure, yeah.
Second
And
best
all the
Minnesota
others are
sports
tied for
team
third.
uniform.
Sorry, which was tied for third, Al?
All the others.
Yeah. Go ahead, Nate.
Now, the Hall of Fame, obviously, they have their awards to recognize writers and broadcasters, but what could they be doing to recognize producers, not just to you talked about, but someone such as Kathy Broderick as well, because they make they turn the lights on, so to speak.
Well, I should say, first of all, that I don't think the Hall of Fame should be inducting sports writers, that's for sure. Nobody really cares about that, and you're paid to do a job, and I don't think anybody, with the exception of the immediate family, goes to the Hall of Fame to look at sports writers' plaques. But anyway, they do it, and it's, I guess that was the original thing when Red Fisher set it up. With Clarence Campbell many years ago, and I think Red wanted to go in there himself, which of course he did, and so that's where that came from. But as for producers, it's pretty simple. You just put them in the Hall of Fame in the builders category, and some of them should be there. Shannon certainly should, and Kathy, Kathy does a tremendous job behind the scenes and has done it for years, but they are builders. I think Don Cherry should be in there as a builder too. I mean, Don Cherry has done more to promote hockey than almost anybody else in the game over the last 20 or 25 years, and just because you don't agree with him, or some people don't, you're not going to put him in there? I mean, what's it for? Is it for the Hockey Hall of Fame for those we agree with, or the Hockey Hall of Fame for people who have done things for hockey? I think it should be the latter.
Well, speaking of being, frank, which was my next question, I mean, you're very frank about your experiences on Hot Stove, and, the whole time you were on Hot Stove, it was on the public broadcaster. So do you think the league is happier to have Hockey Night in Canada in the hands of Rogers?
Well, it's kind of hard for me to answer that one because I haven't been really close to the league since it went into Rogers' hands. And if I were doing the job now that I was doing then, I would know for sure. But really, it's hard for me to say how the league feels. I know that Gary is more liberal than a lot of people give him credit for, including me often, and he never got involved with what was being said. And after I got fired, I ran into him somewhere and I said, "Did you get me fired?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, I thought you meant, was one of two people. I thought you were the one." He said, "If I wanted to get you fired, I would have done it long ago."
Right.
Okay, that's a valid point. But and I asked John Shannon, I said, "What do you think?" He said, "No." He said, because John went to work for the league, if you remember, as some sort of vice president in charge of television or something, whatever it was called, afterwards. And he would sit often with Gary and watch the Hot Stove, and Gary might smile sometimes and shake his head, but he said Gary had never, ever indicated at any time that he would get involved with the format of Hot Stove. So as for whether Gary feels that he does or does not like Rogers, I don't think really that's Gary's concern. I think Gary just wants to make sure that check comes in every month.
I will say I did work at the NHL Network, and when the U.S. started really pushing the envelope and pushing, for bigger presence, because it was located in Scarborough in the TSN buildings. I remember the producer they sent to be hands-on, the first thing he said is, "You guys make boring TV," and we recorded off the intake Coach's Corner, and we played that because, of course, NHL Network was primarily for U.S. fans, but being broadcast out of Canada, and that was that was pretty much the first thing I remember him doing. So with that, sorry, go ahead.
Gary wants some boredom, certainly, and one of my concerns, not just about Hot Stove or just about hockey, but about the entire newspaper industry, is what has happened to it. And I think it's a shame, and I think it's a significant loss for all our society, because the newspapers, for as long as anybody looks back in recorded history since Gutenberg invented the press, have been a conscience, and they've been a check on the authority figures, and they've been a balance. And so when governments, especially governments, but sometimes corporations, do things that they shouldn't be doing, it was the newspapers who exposed them. And how many movies have we seen where somebody is wronged and goes to various functionaries and they all say, "I'm not going to, let's go to the newspaper and tell them." But now the newspapers don't have that clout anymore. And I think it's a shame, especially in the entire aspects of our society, not just in sports, but in hockey. The way it has been manifested is that when all these newspapers started cutting back, Gary, or the NHL media, hired a lot of them, a lot of very, very good ones, but they really put the restraints on them.
Right.
You don't see the kind of articles from those people that you used to see when they were working in the newspapers.
Right.
Now you see the fluff pieces, the nice little features about their wives and family, or their dogs, or their beards, or something or other,
Right.
or their travails, but you don't see the kind of stuff that you used to see. And so it's the same, I think, NHL media and NHL TV, and that they're all the same. They're going to give you what the NHL head office, i.e. Gary, wants you to see or read, and nothing else.
Now, I wanted to ask, about being, I guess, a check on yourself, because I think we had a recent guest who said, when she finished her manuscript, she showed it to all these people she played with, all these coaches she had. There's no hard and fast rule for someone who's writing a nonfiction book, but how do you approach it when you feel like you need to be critical about someone you worked with and it's going to be in a book?
Over the years, you learn how far you can go, and you have to remember who you're working for, and it's not the person you're writing about. You try to be fair, and all the years in hockey, I get one or two guys got mad at me, but I've often told the story about if you go to a baseball player who's just booted a double play ground ball and you ask him about it, whatever, he'll shout at you, or the sun got in his eyes when he was looking down or something, whatever the case may be. It wasn't his fault. But you ask a hockey player, saying, how can you let that guy go around you? Oh, geez, he said I was so bad on that. I can't believe it. I was just terrible out there today. And that's the difference. So if you're critical of hockey players, I always found, but you don't ridicule them. You just say, you made a mistake on this play, and this is what he should have done, and this is what he did do. They'll accept that. It's not a problem. And similarly with any other aspect of their life, if they've made a mistake, they know it, and hockey players accept it. So you just have to remember who you're dealing with, whether it's a hockey player or somebody in another sport, and you have to be fair. I mean, we all make mistakes, and you have to say that it was a mistake, but you don't say, wow, boy, they should have put a pylon on the ice. He would have been better than this stick, out there. Then now they're going to get mad, and then so they should. So you just have to do it in the right way.
Al, later on in your career, you had the 28-minute work week, and that's when I got to know you.
Yeah.
So
that's not counting the 10 minutes of work it was to try and steal some sense into your ideas. That was on top of it.
Hey,
but
I was new then.
Okay.
No, it was actually, I will say, it was a real thrill. I mean, my first sports TV job to walk in, and Steve Koulias walks in, and then Steve Ludzik, Mark Osborne. Mark Osborne says hi, by the way, and of course,
does he? Yeah,
and
a good man, Ozzy. Always a nice person.
Absolutely, and then obviously Al Strachan, and then to work with him was a real thrill. So I
didn't abuse you too much?
No, you guys are great. And I always love going to Gabby's after too. So, but in the 28-minute work week, how did you balance not scooping yourself? And I remember this was the whole time during the Tampa Bay. The owners are writing on the chalkboard and that whole controversy. But so how did you balance not scooping yourself on this? I think it was Tuesdays and Thursdays or something like that before before the Saturday, the big tuna on Saturday night is the hot stove, and obviously the score is much smaller in scope. So how did you balance on not scooping yourself?
Primarily, it was the fact that they were different formats. So we didn't break stories really on the 10-minute shootout, or what's it called, 10-minute misconduct. We just shouted at each other a lot and talked about the ideas that had been brought forward. Should high sticking be a 5-minute major and all that sort of stuff, and so should it be a two-minute, those kind of things. So really, it never ever overlapped. But if I'd had to make a choice on any occasion, then I would not have used it on the score. The CBC was, I should say, a much bigger audience and much more money, so you had to pick your dog you're going to fight,
Right.
Now, there's a strong likelihood when the NHL gets started for, I guess, its second pandemic season, that there's going to be a temporary all-Canadian division. I just wanted to ask what you think are the general phenomena that have sort of contributed to why, no Canadian-based team has won the Stanley Cup since 1993, because I think in the 2 decades prior, I think there were like 13 different Stanley Cup winners from Canada when you count up the Canadians, Oilers, and the Calgary Flames.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any real reason other than just it's a cycle, and we have general managers and they have general managers, and some are better than others, and I think some Canadians are just as good, and they go back and forth. Like if Kenny Holland wins a Stanley Cup in Edmonton now, what are we going to say? He was a Canadian working in the United States. So I think it just goes in cycles. I don't think there's any real reason for it. And people, for the most part, don't mind playing in Canada, no matter what you might read here or there. There are good parts of it in that you can you're a big star wherever you go, but sometimes you don't want to be a big star wherever you go, and yes, there's a lot of pressure on you, but there's pressure on you anywhere. I mean, you think about it, you're out there and you've got a job that you're getting at least $2 million a year, really. The average player is $2 million a year. It's a lot of money, and every game you're being evaluated, and 2 or 3 bad games, and you won't be getting your $2 million. Or if you do, it's going to end at the end of this year. So when you're living a lifestyle like that, there is a lot of pressure on you all the time. So the fact that somebody in some of the larger cities may focus on you and complain about you or something, it doesn't really matter that much to those guys. It's all a part of the job. It's just the peripheral things, like being able to go to a restaurant and not be recognized, or going to a restaurant and having to put up with people mocking you and that sort of stuff. And I don't really think there's any significant reason that you can put your finger on that says that Canadians aren't winning Stanley Cups. I mean, Glenn Sather was a general manager in Canada and did win, and went to New York and didn't win. So what does that mean?
Yeah, okay, all right.
It's just it just comes and goes, and it's not inconceivable that in the next 10 years, Canada could win 5 Stanley Cups. Who knows? I'm not suggesting that they will, but it could just as easily happen.
Now, and I think your last, you write about this in the book, and your last Hockey Night in Canada appearance, I think you were out front on Winnipeg returning to the NHL almost 2 years before it happened. Yeah. Now Seattle is going to give the NHL 32 teams, four equal. They can divide into 4 equal divisions. How optimistic?
Yeah, that was in the book before that.
Yeah, true. How optimistic are you that we'd ever see another new franchise in Canada, particularly, sorry for going on my hobby horse here, a second team in Southern Ontario, that sort of thing?
Probably not really. There's no need for it. The Sportsnet, what are they paying? $5.1 billion, is it, for their rights?
Yep.
When you've got somebody that's paying that much for the rights, why would you want to bring in more teams that could only dilute it? TV is the name of the game these days. I mean, the people in the stands, especially in the COVID era, but even when the buildings are full, really, until you get to the playoffs and you're making all that money because you jack the prices up and you're not paying the playoffs, that's when the real bonanza comes in. But it just doesn't make sense really from an economic point of view to put another team into those areas that are already selling out all the time.
Right.
Why would you do that? All you're doing is taking the value away from teams that don't have problems. So it's a ruthless way of doing it, but it's business, and business tends to be ruthless. Quebec had a chance. There was some movement starting, about a year and a half, 2 years or so before that big Sportsnet contract. But then once that came in, and now Montreal's got that all locked up, and Quebec wouldn't be a part of it, and so they just lost their chance. Then the timing was such that it no longer made sense to put Quebec back in the league. So I don't envision it.
Al,
Right.
sorry, go ahead. Okay, Al, sorry. I just wanted to say, first of all, this podcast interview has been great, and it's gone longer than your 28-minute work week, so I feel like we owe you a check or something. But I do want to close out by asking you, and we can follow this if need be, but I want to ask you, and I thought of Walter Cronkite when I kind of came up with this question, and that, he was kind of upset that he retired too early. But with your, you left Hockey Night in October 2010, I believe, but
Yeah.
Twitter has kind of been a way to give people new life, in a sense. So if Elon Musk refers to Twitter as a war zone, in some way, have you been reborn as a war reporter?
No, I don't think so. I sometimes wonder if I should just stay off Twitter, because it's just astonishing how many monumentally stupid people there are out there. And even the ones who aren't monumentally stupid, but just basically stupid and could be informed, it takes time. And to try and do it in whatever number of characters it is, 110 or something, and people say this and you say, no, that's not the case, and they come up with some little direct quote or just some little small part of the story and say there. And you'd like to have a whole 800-word column to explain why they're missing all the important parts. And when you put all those important parts in, the original statement that you made makes no sense. And so that's the frustrating part of Twitter. So I've been mostly staying off it lately, except for retweeting pictures of dogs and things like that.
Well,
no one is ever going to make Bruce Arthur sensible, no matter how hard I try. So I've given that up too, I think.
You do have close to 10,000 followers, and I thought it was really interesting because you adapted to it quite quickly. You talk about in the book, or write about in the book, how you're I guess a Luddite when it comes to technology, but you really seem to embrace Twitter, at least early on. So
you didn't see some of the mistakes I made along the way, I guess. That one time when I answered two questions in one tweet, and it looked like I was saying that all libraries should be shut down, and that wasn't. And
Right.
Twitter just went crazy, and say, no, what's up? I say,
right.
Just saying that they should pay authors a bit more is what I'm trying to say here. And so once in a while I do screw it up, but it's nice to have that many followers, and when I come out with my next book, we'll see how much of an impact that has.
Yeah, so this book comes out, I believe, on November 30th, and Hockey's Hot Stove, the untold stories of the original insiders. So Al, thank you so much for giving us the time today to talk about this book, and enjoy your time down in Florida.
I will try my best. It's nice and warm. It's been nice and warm down here, and I don't have an awful lot to do now. I have finished the next book, which is a total change of direction. Okay. And I don't know how many of those 10,000 people will be interested in it, because it's not a hockey book. It's a nonfiction book, a sad but true story of a man who in 1942 was a sergeant in the Royal Air Force and came to Canada to do some training to help train people in the Royal Canadian Air Force how to handle machine guns so that you didn't shoot the propeller off your plane and things like that. Okay. And he went to a dance on a Friday night, June the 5th, 1942, and on June the 7th, 1942, they found the body of a girl, and on June 10th, he was charged with rape and murder, and in December he was hanged, and he was totally innocent. Totally innocent.
Wow.
Okay.
So I've got all kinds of documentation that had never been available previously, and the book has been done, and it was one of the reasons I was in Malta working out that book, because it's going to go in England rather than here, because he was in the Royal Air Force. And then we're going to see what we can do to get it distributed in Canada, maybe through Amazon Canada or something. But as I say, it's a total change of approach from the other things I've done. There's no mention whatsoever of hockey in it, but I think it's a fascinating story, and you can still go and visit his grave in St. Andrews, New Brunswick, if you want, and see the courthouse where he was tried, and see the jail cell in which he was kept, and see the remains of the air base where he was working, and go out to Black's Harbor and see the girl's tombstone. It's still a lot of references around. And if you ever buy Brunswick sardines, you'll notice that they are from that area of New Brunswick, and they were started by this girl's grandparents. They started that company. So it's a truly Canadian story in a lot of ways, but the Canadian publishers didn't want to have it because they said it involved a British airman, the Canadian. So anyway, that's I'll let you know when that one's available, and we can alter the format of your podcast for a week and do hanging stories rather than hockey.
You know what? That sounds like a very, very intriguing book. Al, do you care to share the man's name?
Yeah, Thomas Hutchings.
Ah, okay. Well, yeah, that is.
And he left a 1-year-old daughter and a wife in England. He was 21 years old, and it was a real total travesty on the Mounties' part. Just absolute total travesty on the Mounties and the New Brunswick Bar Association, and just society in New Brunswick generally in those days. It really basically they murdered this guy, and he didn't kill anybody.
Wow.
So,
well, we have certainly never had an ending like that to a SportsLit episode, so...
I guess not. Well, you never know what you're going to get from me, Neil, do you?
No, we never do, but we know what we got today, and it was excellent, and an excellent conversation with you, Al, so thank you for your time.
Okay, well, thanks for thinking of me.
Thank you.
Great.